at some more analysis of the aftermath of Brexit. Marco Vicenzino joins us, an international affairs commentator and director of Global Strategy Project. Marco, thanks as ever for joining us here on France 24. The vote to leave, this decision that the UK public has made, how do you think this will change the UK's relationship with the rest of the world?
One could say an independent UK obviously means also a diminished UK diplomatically in terms of its relationship with Europe, its special relationship with the US. And I think in terms of global security, the global security also in the long term will be weakened as a result. Principally, remember, Britain has a seat at the UN Security Council, it remains a member of NATO, but for the US in particular, the US, a special relationship between the US and the UK, for the US it was important to have that special partner in having influence within Europe. Now that Britain is out, the US is going to have to do a more effective job in terms of managing its relationship with Europe, probably getting closer to Germany, getting closer to France. And also what it does also is that it also strengthens the hand of Russia within Europe without the UK there. So you see an independent UK is a diminished UK globally within Europe, its relationship within America, and also if it leads eventually to a dissolution of the UK, what I mean by that is if Scotland leaves Great Britain, if there is another referendum, that puts it at a further disadvantage. So I think in the long term, it's definitely for the Western world. You can go for the broader Western alliance and global security itself. I don't think it's particularly positive development.
So this, among other things, is going to lead to a total recalibration of the relationship between Washington and London.
I mean, it has to be reconfigured. The realities being, once again, is the fact that the U.S. relied on the UK for many things. Yes, it can continue to rely for it at the Security Council. It can continue to rely in many different ways. But what we see is that it is a UK itself, within the eyes of Washington, will remain, although the President Obama did emphasize the fact that there was going to be the special relationship remains. He made that clear rhetorically and publicly. Behind the scenes, American advisors have been preparing a lot more for this possibility and this scenario.
There are some people who voted leave, Marco. Sorry to interrupt you. Some people who voted leave, Marco, in the UK did so thinking that it will make the UK a safer place in terms of its homeland security, in terms of who comes through the borders, and obviously the issue about security. Do you feel that what's happened now is giving those people who voted leave what they want, a safer UK?
In terms of giving a safer UK, if you look at it specifically from the terrorism threat, in terms of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, its potential attacks on the European continent, what happens here is that I think the information sharing between the UK and other Western partners will largely remain intact. In terms of its ability to control its borders, it has been able to control its borders. Once again, it's not part of the Schengen group, unlike countries like France, Belgium, Italy, and other places, whereby that free passport travel has allowed a lot of jihadists to take advantage of the 2015 migration and the continuing migration crisis to spread throughout Europe and to set up operations throughout Europe and eventually strike, as they did in Paris and as they did in Brussels. I think the UK, especially after the 2005 attacks in London, a lot of lessons have been learned. The British security has beefed up its ability to counter the terrorism threat. Not to say that a terrorism hit is not possible. You can never exclude that possibility. But I think in the UK, in the last 10 years and beyond, they've been preparing for that possibility. So UK remains strong from a security perspective.
2005, you mentioned it, Marco, the attacks on London. They were homegrown terrorists. That isn't solved by any leaving of the EU, is it, at all?
I mean, in terms of that's the phenomenon of the homegrown terrorists, it's not just in the UK itself. It's throughout the world. We saw here in the US the Orlando attacks claiming 49 lives. Those were a US born and bred person. In terms of the ability of these individuals to move around the country, it's very difficult for law enforcement to spot particularly the lone wolves. Many of them get radicalized through the internet. So even if you can control borders are still virtually porous, and that terrorism threat remains a reality. So we're dealing with a whole perhaps a brave new world in terms of terrorism, and particularly their ability not just to operate across borders, but to recruit within borders through the internet and to strike in countries without having to have direct contact with other jihadists out in the field, of going to Iraq, Syria, whatever other places where, traditionally terrorism has been headquartered.
Indeed, you mentioned that phrase, Brave New World, Marco, and the continuation of it is which has such terrible creatures in it, and most terrible of those is this aspect of terrorism, which you've dealt with there. Can I keep you on this question for a bit longer, though? The idea of a Europe-wide force, a Europe-wide police force, Europol, is that something that works? I've heard people who voted Leave and people who campaigned for Leave saying it is a nonsense, it isn't going to work, it can't work, and the UK is better handling its own policing.
In terms of European-wide police force, that terminology, I think, is just too far-fetched. What you need is European-wide intelligence sharing. Police is something domestic. It remains within the realm of the national governments. However, there needs to be greater sharing of intelligence across Europe, across the Western world, and I would say the world at large. I mean, this terrorism threat is not just limited to certain places. It's global. These people operate internationally. They operate across borders. They operate virtually. So as a result, I think Europe as a whole needs to do better in intelligence sharing. And even if Brexit becomes a reality, I mean, the Brexit vote has taken place, but technically the UK has not left Europe. Despite that entire process, information gathering, information sharing needs to always be improved, needs to be increased. And this entire terrorism game, from an intelligence perspective, it's a cat and mouse game whereby you constantly have to be updated and upgraded in terms of best technology and information sharing and gathering.
And what you're saying, I'm reading into it now, it implies a dialogue, an easy, direct and immediate dialogue between all agencies concerned. There's already language barriers, of course, all across Europe. If a major country like the UK is out of that loop of communication within the European setup, surely that makes the situation in security terms harder, more difficult, and slows it somewhat.
No one benefits. No one in Britain benefits. No one in Europe benefits. No one around the world benefits. So in that sense, what I'm saying is that although if this breakup, if Brexit does ultimately become a reality, a technical reality whereby they complete all the documents and all the legal means to leave Europe, on the intelligence side, it's absolutely and fundamentally important and indispensable for the UK to remain part of that broader intelligence gathering and intelligence sharing world. Personally, I don't think it's going to be. Britain will pull back in that sense. No one can afford to. So I think at the end of the day, although other important details about Brexit need to be negotiated if it eventually takes place, from purely an intelligence perspective, from a counterterrorism perspective, I think all are fully aware, all responsible, at least all responsible officials are fully aware of the need for increased information gathering and information sharing.
Marco Vicenzino, thank you, sir, very much indeed for joining us and sharing your analysis with us here on France 24 in English. Marco Vicenzino, International Affairs Commentator and Director of Global Strategy Project. Thanks again.